Hello and welcome to Think Like a Game Designer. I'm your host, Justin Gary. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with brilliant game designers from across the industry with a goal of finding universal principles that anyone can apply in their creative life. You could find episodes and more at thinklikeagamedesigner.com.
In today's episode, I speak with Theresa Derringer. Theresa is the owner and CEO of Temple Gate Games, a digital board game development studio based out of San Francisco. Her team is known for digitizing incredible board games like Ascension for virtual reality, the only deck building game in virtual reality as far as I know, Dominion, Race for the Galaxy, Roll for the Galaxy, and my personal favorite, Shards of Infinity. These games are incredibly well executed. I have known Theresa for many years, and she is a incredible polymath. She's very good at so many different aspects of the job, and we jump around to all different parts of game design, of running an indie studio. We go into her background working for EA and how she came up in the unglamorous but critically important job of QA, and the importance of UI design, how to think about designing for games on mobile versus games on the tabletop versus games on VR. We talk about AI, and specifically the incredibly good AI neural network designs that she's used long before anybody else knew about things like ChatGPT and generative AI in her games, as well as what the future of gaming looks like in this space. We talk about many of the interesting challenges and trade-offs of designing games as someone who makes board games and turns them digital, what the design challenges are that come from that. And I have a lot of insights on that as well, because I've now worked with multiple teams on this thing. So it's a really interesting space and a really great way to see what it's like to be an indie developer, to have shared passions of tabletop design and tabletop games and digital games and how those overlap. Theresa's so much fun to talk to. I absolutely adore her, and that came through in this podcast. She's got an incredible amount of insight to share. And so without any further ado, here is Theresa Derringer. Hello and welcome. I am here with Theresa Derringer. Theresa, it's so great to finally get you on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, I've got so many good memories with you and stories to talk about ever since we met up at Gen Con and we talked and we worked on the Ascension VR game, and I want to dig into all of that and your whole company's history, but I didn't know actually a ton about your background before you started Templegate, and I did some research leading into this, and you have a lot more kind of big tech gaming experience than I had realized. So maybe let's start people before we get into the fun of the fun and challenges, of course, of running an indie studio. What got you into working with the big boys, and let's get a little bit into your origin story.
Oh yeah, sure. So my family is like a video game development family. My mom worked at Electronic Arts when I was growing up, and technically I got my first paycheck from EA over 20 years ago, probably, from EA, just doing some after school QA on a project she was working on. So I've been in video games for a really long time, and my dad's a programmer, my stepdad's a programmer, and right out of college I didn't know what else to do, so I applied for a job at Electronic Arts, which my mom was no longer working there, and I didn't ask her for any favors on that, but I've definitely been accused of Nepo baby. And but anyway, I got a QA job at EA and started working at Maxis, and got involved in this incredible team working on Spore, and worked on SimCity and The Sims. And then I started my first company making games with another person I had met at Maxis, and we made a game called Cannon Brawl, and that was about 3 years in development. And then I started another company with some other people that I had met at Maxis in the board game club, and we are now making digital board games with that second company.
Okay. All right. There's a lot. Yeah, that's great. It was a great, very quick overview. So I'm going to pull at some threads here. I think you might be the first guest I've had that comes from the legacy of game designers. So it's a really interesting. What was it like growing up with like parents that made games? Like, was that as awesome as it sounds, or was it just kind of, oh, they're just going to work and doing the thing?
No, it was awesome. It was amazing. Like, I think there was a program at Electronic Arts at the time where they would just sort of load up their employees with video games for free. There was like a point system, and you could spend the points on consoles. You could spend the points on games. I think anything that was an EA game was just free, and then anything that was like a game by another publisher had a points value. So I think they wanted their employees to be familiar. So there was just a budget for that. So we just had more games than we could. We knew what to do with. I'd give them out for Halloween, but the caveat was like we weren't allowed to play them.
Trick or treating at your house. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we weren't actually allowed to play them. My mom was kind of strict, so it was like this forbidden, close but far.
Wait. Say more now, because this is now really interesting. So your parents are like, they're like drug dealers, but they won't let you get hooked on the supply. What's going on? Like, why are they not letting you play these things? And how are they squaring that circle of like their job is to make this, but their kids not good enough for their kids?
I mean, I think I didn't have a great amount of self-discipline in terms of like, I think if I could redo it, I might like set the console down and show my mom I could have a disciplined like life and do my homework. But I think I was a little too into it. And
yeah. I see. So you were really hooked on games from early on, and your parents were worried, not about games in general, but specifically about you playing games. They're like, this girl's going to throw away her life and just make games all the time. And that's all she's going to do. And now here you are. Okay, got it.
And now here I am.
Okay. All right. Fascinating. So I love, you had this very comment, like people thought it might be like nepotism, you go into EA, but like you started in QA, or you started at the bottom rung. Like, I felt like if there was some nepotism involved, you probably would have gotten a better starting position.
That's how I feel.
Yeah. So, and I definitely heard other stories kind of like this. Ben Brode's story, I think, was similar. Kind of started as a pizza delivery guy and then got his way into QA and then showed some talent and kind of worked his way up and, eventually obviously had great success. And so I think there's some, one of the things I like to dig into is like the kind of lessons you learn from taking on different roles. And one of the things I love about you is you have so many different roles that you inhabit and excel at. And so let's walk through some more, because again, I just want to linger on this part for a while because I don't know this part as well about you. What did you learn during that time at QA there? And then I want to dig into some time working on, Sim City and Sims and Spores and all those games, which I also really enjoy and are pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm getting more comfortable just like explaining that I am a generalist. And I think it's often in many different industries, I think it's a dirty word, and people try to pretend that they're specialists even when they're not. And I think I'm just embracing this generalist identity, which is like complicated, and it takes too long to explain it to people. And I think a lot of times when people meet me, but probably other generalists, especially at small companies, people meet me a lot of times in the context of a gaming convention, and I may be working at a booth. And I think they think, oh, that's the booth person. But, I'm also the person who, negotiates our IP deals and does our artwork and does our audio. I mean, it's just like at a small company, people have to wear like lots of hats in order for the company to exist and be able to pay bills without being insolvent. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that is the frame that you bring to this, because to me, like I absolutely consider myself a generalist, and that's like why I'm able to run a small company, right? I couldn't do that if I was just, an engine designer or just, someone who talks on the camera or whatever. I think that skill set is incredibly valuable. So it's interesting that there's a pejorative sense to it. I think that you perceive in the industry.
I think it's just, I think people only have a certain bandwidth for understanding other people, understanding anything. And I think you are such a great example of a generalist. I mean, you're one of the only people I've worked with that's both the publisher and the designer. That wasn't like a Kickstarter self-publisher situation, but like a serious publication operation happening, and designer and
it's I often wonder what, when you think about the role, and I'll put this question back to you, but I'll give you my kind of thoughts on it first, is like, the role and values of being a generalist versus being a specialist, right? There's obvious advantages to being a specialist, in that like I can just get as good as I can at this one craft and really, really focus down, right? I've often wondered in the counterfactual world, because when I first made Ascension, I got offered, I won't say by who, but I got offered to be bought out at that time. And they're just like, they'll buy the company, they'll pay me, they'll buy all my stock, they'll pay me a royalty, and I would just be a game designer again, right? After building up this thing. And I considered it was one of those tough choices, right? And I'm really happy with the way things turned out. I kept the company, kept things moving. But I wonder how much better of a game designer might I be in the world where I just specialize in that, what my life would be like. Impossible to know. But on the flip side, so maybe I'd have more games designed, maybe I'd have a little bit better refining of the craft. But on the flip side, my ability to know about how production works and how marketing works and how to manage a team, and like being able to, run the booth and see people playtesting and managing and seeing how games demo and what that turnaround looks like and understanding all that stuff, I think also makes me a better designer, right? Because I'm able to understand all these different aspects and how my design choices impact the product and impact the marketing and impact everything that happens within a project. So to me, I think there's real advantages to both. How do you think about that now in your role of having run a company now for, what is this now? You've been doing for 10 years more? How long have you been at with Templegate specifically?
Well, Templegate started in 2013. I started doing my own company, my first company in 2010. So
okay, great. Yeah. So you're okay. So actually very similar to me then, right? This is 15 years. We're celebrating the 15-year anniversary of Ascension, which is basically the kickoff of my company, give or take. And so 15 years of doing this is an incredibly long time, incredibly difficult. So kudos to being able to keep on this track. I know from personal experience how hard it is. So what do you think then in terms of, you've chosen the role of entrepreneur / small indie studio / specialist? How do you view the skill set that you've developed and where the strengths are, lessons learned?
It's funny. I think like you were kind of mentioning the QA being sort of like the bottom rung or this sort of like lowest on the totem pole at the company. And, that is the way they're paid. That is sort of the esteem that they're granted and the prestige. But also it's funny. I almost feel like there's this inverse correlation between the like sort of lowest in the totem pole and most valuable like skills to have at a company, like marketing, QA. These are things that are not always given like the most prestigious appreciation. And yet these are like the skill sets that you build up. I mean, the skill of marketing a game is like, nobody's quite figured it out. I think it's a kind of a shifty thing to try to put your finger on the pulse of a culture and understand what is looking for and what's going to hit. QA being able to just sort of like, have some amount of like brute force mentality to like, I am going to be playing this game 1,000 times and I'm going to stick with it. And, maybe I want to like look at something else right now. Too bad. You gotta just like keep going with it, because that like repeated iteration is going to be that chisel that polishes the game into something really beautiful. And so just shout out to like all of the people in the roles that are kind of like crapped on sometimes. And those are skills I'm feel so lucky to have spent time developing those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to all the people doing the hard work of QA. I have been in that role myself because, again, as you're a small company, you're like everybody, all hands on deck. We're all QA now, right? That happens at periodic times, and so it is critical because those, I often say, the last 10% of a project takes 90% of the time, and because it's those little details and making sure that things work and making sure that all the buttons are doing the intuitive thing and that things don't break. It's absolutely critical. The difference between like a mediocre project and a great project. So I want to jump to now like a little bit more of our story and how I encountered you and some of the projects we worked on together, because that's the stuff I know the best. And I love, again, I cannot recommend enough every game that you guys do. You execute super well. But the first time I met you was at Gen Con, and we had I believe it, correct me if I'm remembering, because this is now a while ago, but it was like we had an early preview of our Gift of the Elements expansion. And you came to an event and were there, and you had immediately made an impression on us. And you were not just, a fan that was coming by, but you actually like had some pretty significant skills and were interested in somebody we wanted to work with. How do you remember that event?
I kind of remember it differently.
Okay, great.
But I don't honestly trust my memory that well. So you might be right.
Well, I'd love to hear your version of this because I also had to check with other people from my team because I wasn't super clear. I had it. I just, as now, as far as I'm concerned, we've always been working together and it's always been really
Right.
cool. But
Yeah.
it was something like, again, yeah. Tell me from your perspective and let's reconstruct the past here for a minute.
So this is my memory. I was like completely obsessed with Ascension. It's probably my favorite game. And I think I signed up for the a tournament at Gen Con. And I made it. I won my tournament or something. Anyway, somehow I found myself in like the world championships, I think. And I didn't win at all. But, I sort of like got a chance to talk to some of the people. And I don't remember that you were there. I thought it was
No,
Gary
it
Arant.
was Gary Arant for sure because he's who I talked to reconfirm these events. Because he was the person who
Yes.
flagged. I remember he flagged me and said, "Hey, you've got to meet this girl," and
Yeah.
that's when I started my conversation with you.
Yeah. So I believe that we started a conversation, maybe a little email. Gary might have like introed me to you through email. And we were working on VR games at the time, and we had been toying with social VR. And we were finding that, like, just like in real life with a bunch of nerds, it's like awkward to socialize when there's no activity for me. And so, like, board games were like this, hey, like, there could be an activity and it could be really fun. So let's explore some board games. And so when I got a chance to talk to you guys, I think I kind of pitched, what if we did a VR version of Ascension? That might have not happened right away, though. I think it's also possible that I just like showed you guys. I think I had like fan art that I had done of Ascension, and I think I probably showed you guys. And anyways, at some point, I pitched doing a VR version of Ascension, and I believe we met up at South by Southwest. I came and saw a talk that you did was phenomenal at South by Southwest, and then I think
yeah, we chatted there. Yeah, and so I want to, and I'm not just doing this to come back down memory lane because I want to bring it. I was trying to provide utility to the audience, not just utility and fun for me, which it's got to be both. But
yeah.
Because there are steps here that are in fact like repeatable for people out there, right? Like everybody that wants to get into the industry wants to do things like the paying your dues and working for some other company and doing the roles that nobody else wants to do or that are looked down upon to learn skills and meet and make connections, because that's the most important thing. In fact, like not only do you learn the skills, but you learn the people that are good at what they do and do real good work, and they learn and they meet you, and then you use that to build stuff, and you just put things out there and build things. And that's what you did. You had already built a VR games, and you had already done things, and you already created art. And so that's what got my attention, or got Gary's attention, and then got my attention that, hey, she's not just talking, because I have plenty of fans that talk about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, but you had actually done things that were credible, that showed that, hey, this is someone who's a genuine fan, and you showed that you were a genuine fan and would take good care of the brand. You were someone who had shown the skill set that you could do things that I couldn't do, and that were like valuable to the brand and would be fun to work on. And you were someone who when I met you was like, oh, wow, this person would be really fun to work with. And so those combinations, right? Like doing the work and building the relationships, putting out work that is like interesting and credible and gives you some, something to stand on, and then just reaching out and making the ask and being someone that people actually want to work with. Those are clear, repeatable, substantial steps that get you to success. And so I just wanted to like tell the specific story because I think it's important for people to hear, like, you did the things, and it takes years. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of effort, but it does work. And so anyway, that's where I kind of wanted to loop that in. And think I'm grateful, man. I was, you're, like I said, you're amazing, and everything you've created for us and elsewhere is really cool. The Ascension VR app is really cool, and it was really fun to like work on, from my side. So I want to talk about VR for a little bit. Let's linger on VR before we move on to other stuff and other board game things, because I think VR is such an interesting space. Like, it sounds really cool. It is. Every time you have a VR experience for the first time, it is really cool. Even from the early days, I remember playing some of the cool big VR experiences, even in like the late '80s, from that existed. And somehow it never took off. And there have been these waves of like, the VR gets kind of popular and people say it's going to be the next thing, and then it kind of fades. And then it gets really popular and then it kind of be the next thing, and then it kind of fades. And so I want to just like, and I found the design challenges of VR, like what it provided that we couldn't do otherwise, and what constraints it provided, to be really fascinating. So I'll just let you run with this a little bit, and then we'll just jump in and I'll talk about the Ascension part specifically. How'd you get into VR? Why VR? What about the industry do you think is interesting? Pick any thread you want. We'll dance around the subject.
Yeah, well, when we started our company, it's really hard to make an indie game and make a living doing it. Spoiler alert. So, there was this opportunity. There was this VR competition, the Oculus VR Jam, and there was a cash prize. And so, me and my friends, this is kind of how Temple Gates got spun up. We decided to enter, and we made this VR game. We didn't necessarily have at the time a passion for VR. We were just trying to figure out how do we differentiate ourselves as a company, and maybe this is a route. We didn't know. It was sort of a new thing for us. And like you said, it's been coming in these waves. And this was a wave where there was a lot of funding, there was a lot of excitement, there's lots of hardware technology getting kind of spun up, and that hardware arms race was creating a sort of side cyclone of financial opportunities where there was VC, there were grants happening. And we were able to take advantage of a few opportunities, and that was able to sort of financially support the company to get going. And so the VR space was an incredibly interesting space to do design work. There were times where I, as a fairly junior at the time designer, I was making things that no one else in the world had made design decisions on, that were getting copied into other people's products. And that was happening, I think, for everybody in VR, because the design space is so rich. How do you treat when your player looks up? You have to draw something there. What kind of thing do you draw? What kind of, how do you take advantage of this new real estate that you normally don't have when you're just looking at a screen in a PC or a phone in front of you, when you have this new real estate above you, below you, that you basically have to do something with. It was this revelry of stumbling across novel design challenges and solutions in this very fun way that seems to usually only happen in academics, but not in real production product making. And then on the flip side of that, it was really challenging because there was all these unsolved problems and nobody had solutions. And so we're all sort of blindly grasping in the dark for what are the decisions that are going to become the new standards? How is input going to work? And how will that be standardized? It hadn't been standardized. And as far as I know, it still hasn't been standardized. Some really big challenges. And I think that's a part of where it's still facing problems. And my view is you had Facebook, which was, I think getting some of its market competed with by other companies. And I think there's some pressure on Facebook at the time, Facebook, now Meta, to pivot or diversify what is its product. And VR was an option. I think they put a huge amount of resources. They bought Oculus. They put a huge amount of resources into that. And, now that AI is kind of an opportunity for Facebook to translate its giant wealth of user data. I think there's less pressure on them to explore VR as what is the new incarnation of Facebook or Meta. I think maybe that's shifting into AI in a way that is now putting less pressure on VR to be a thing that happens. So I think there's these giant market forces. And that's just one example from one company, these giant market forces that are affecting, it all trickles down to are there grant opportunities for tiny companies like ours? Probably not so much right now, where there were, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. And I listen, there is it's a great, I appreciate that overview. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, that reality of when you're running a small company, seeing, you want to make the kinds of games that you're passionate about. And I've always believed that. And you exactly did that, right? You're making, digital board games is not the the default big money opportunity, right? You're doing it because you love it, but you're finding the medium and the opportunity and the space that technology provides and the financial markets provide to build things that you can build. So you move to VR when you wouldn't have thought to move to VR. And so that's, it's an interesting space. I mean, obviously we got involved in a crypto associated game because of the financial opportunities that are involved in that. And there are interesting design challenges and design opportunities that come from that. And so you kind of build things that you're passionate about in the space that the kind of, larger market provides. So again, it's another sort of universalizable tip as you start thinking about what to do as an indie studio. Where do you build? How do you build something you're passionate about that also has market potential, or at least some runway to see if there's market potential? And so let's talk about the VR design challenges here. To just bring it back to like kind of from the business side to the design side, and I'll kick this off just talking about it from the Ascension side, right? So there's a real design principle I believe in, that the medium is the message, right? The form factor you are designing for, the user interface that you're designing for, defines in many ways what your game is going to be and how good your game can be in that form, and how you express it. So for example, right, Ascension obviously took the formula from Dominion, where I felt it was cumbersome to have so many different piles of cards and so many different things to do, and the setup was a lot. And I was like, listen, let's streamline that and make it so I just shuffle one deck and deal it. And I, when we started off, I said, let's, Ascension, you could set up, play, complete, and reset up a game of Ascension at the same time it takes you to set up a game of Dominion, which is, maybe a little bit farcical, but got the idea across that, like, I'm here to make this fast. And one of the other consequences of that was the game worked really, really well on a phone because it was a lot less information that had to get across. And so the game really thrived on a phone, but there were tons of challenges that came from that. How do you compress? Because it's so little screen real estate. And how do you change things to be able to make asynchronous play better? And so we had a bunch of design challenges when we moved to the phone that were upside. I could play it. I was proud of how quick a game of Ascension was in the physical world. Oh my goodness. In the digital world, it's, it goes from 30 minutes to 2 minutes, right? It's like incredible. And so what does that mean? And how does that change the flow, and how important it is to make it almost a ritualized behavior? And that was a big deal. But then moving to VR, totally different set of challenges, right? Totally different world, where now I have all the space in the world in principle, right? I could put things anywhere around me in 3D space. But there's a presence factor that is possible. That's definitely not possible on a phone. It's closer to what you would try to get in the physical tabletop experience. But then there's a bunch of challenges that come with that too. Like, I realized very quickly, you don't actually want to have stuff like relevant information on the ceiling, because looking up for relevant information is terrible, right? So there's and we with the Ascension VR game, we ended up having the cards like fly up in front of you, and not just mirror a tabletop where I would look down on a table, but they're actually coming up in front of me. So maybe just talk about some of the stuff from your perspective, and like some of these, fumbling in the dark lessons learned about what works or what's a challenge if people think about designing for VR versus another platform.
Yeah. So working on the VR version of Ascension, there were some really cool opportunities. So one thing that we could take advantage of is the fact that your camera positioning can change in a way that makes more sense if you have like this, it's like a one-to-one first person sort of experience. So you don't really manipulate your camera when you're looking at a normal card game on the phone. But what that gives you is the opportunity to have modes, for example, teaching mode, where you can come and look behind a friend and see what kind of cards they're working with and make some suggestions on how they might want to get their game going. And you got voice chat in VR, so you can have that conversation via voice. And so the opportunities for just things like tutorialization of something like Ascension, where you can kind of come in and help your friend get into the game. This is a big challenge we have with typical digital board games. We see a lot of adoption from people who already know how to play the game, but it's harder to get people to pick up something as complicated as a board game when they don't already know how to play it, typically because some of those costs, the cost of like learning all of this information, that's like a board game, it's like 45 minutes of rules before you even play sometimes. where a typical video game is like one rule, you master it, show mastery, get your reward, learn another rule. And there's this like very nice supported gradation of complexity. With board games, there's this big cost up front. And usually that cost is sort of like mellowed out with like you're having some ice cream at the table with your friend, and it's like your best friend, and you're in your house or in your favorite room with your cool board game table. So what VR does, in my opinion, it kind of brings you back to some of those favorite things. You can still have your best friend teaching you how to play this game. You can hear their voice, you can get tips from them in real time, and it creates a much more social and sort of like less sterile environment. I mean, if you're playing on a phone, sometimes people don't even, like there's not a huge difference in the perception of the experience between playing with an AI opponent versus a person. Because unless you have an external chat app, like you've got Discord open or something like that, you're probably not having a real-time voice conversation. You're probably not having a laugh when something silly happens in the same way, and can be very sterile. So the social opportunities of VR for board games for Ascension were big. And we also had, an opportunity to deliver a really immersive experience. I mean, like we have the whole background is like based on some of the card art, and the characters that you inhabit are based on the cards.
So cool. I want to just gush about this for a second before we go further, because like you are literally like inside the life-bound world of Ogo. You look around and it's this lush, cool world that you're in. You see the other players are characters from the world. When they talk, you hear their voice from that side of your device, and you see them move, and so the virtual sense of presence of being here in this moment is so cool, and unlike certainly anything you get on your phone or a normal screen. So it was such a cool execution, and such a great, like, it was the closest anything I've played has come to the like feeling of being in the room. I felt like if I could just pass like some Doritos across to the other person, I would be totally in, to my normal board game experience. It was really, really well executed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I mean, so here's to like the next round of VR form factors coming along, and financial models making it possible for developers to explore the space more.
Well, yeah. So let's to linger on this a little bit further, and then we'll move on to other things, because there's tons of stuff. And again, you are you are I was going to say jack of all trades, but really a master of many trades. So there's a lot of topics I want to cover, but like from VR evolving to what I see as potentially the next wave, which seems to be where the money and the tech is going, which is AR, right? Like I think there's a real interesting space for AR game design, as people now have like, kind of heads up display glasses, which are still very rudimentary, but I've used I actually had Tim Cook demo me the Apple one, which was surreal. But I've done which is just, you're basically wearing ski goggles on your head, but it was like very immersive and very interactive, to the Meta ones. And, Google's got new ones coming out soon. Like that ability to have not just a immersive world that takes me away from the current world, but a one that like projects it as part of the current world. Like I could definitely see that being pretty amazing if like you and I are sitting across a table and we're like, hey, let's play a game of chess. And the chess board appears in front of us and we're moving pieces around, something like that feels pretty powerful. How do you think about AR versus VR, or where you see that tech going?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting space to explore. With VR, like, I remember I used to have a harder time with flying, and I remember working on some VR games with the like mindset that this modal experience, when you put the VR headset on your face, you really don't see the world around you. And that could be a feature because maybe you don't want to see it, like maybe you're dealing with something unpleasant like a flight and you don't like flying. But then I think on the other side, when AR gives you that pass-through experience where you get to see the world around you, I think, that might make people feel more comfortable and sort of like less vulnerable. Like you've got a kind of a blindfold on in VR. And yeah, I think similarly, it's going to be a really rich space to explore. Probably lots of new design that the people working in AR, I imagine, are having a big kick with. I haven't done too much. I did a tango game, or technically I was a artist in residence for the SF MoMA, and I did a tango app for them back in the day, the one little AR app, but not an expert.
technically you were an artist in residence for MoMA. Hold on.
Yeah.
What? I need a side quest into this story. How did you become an artist in residence at MoMA in San Francisco, and what was that like?
Oh, it was so cool. So there was some kind of initiative where they just asked a bunch of developers to make AR apps that featured art in the MoMA, and so I made one.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And so you just and I guess maybe this is then the other piece about your personality then is like to be willing to just like, hey, I'm just going to be the one to do this and jump in. Like that's a lot of people would be scared to do that. You know, they don't see themselves as an artist that belongs in MoMA, or like what gives you the confidence to do this, and also it's a massive commitment to jump and do these things, or you competed in a competition trying to win prizes to keep your company running, to jump into this, which was certainly far from guaranteed. What is it? What do you think it is about you? Where do you get that confidence to jump in, or how would you advise someone else out there to even find these kinds of opportunities, and let alone to have the courage to jump in and decide to go for it?
Well, I definitely think the opportunities kind of come in these like waves, and I haven't seen some of these in a while. So if you're not jumping in, don't worry. I don't think you're missing out. I think there's just moments where there's a lot of probably funding trickling through that's getting to them. I don't know the back end of what was going on at the MoMA, but I imagine it was all part of something. But I think anyone who's going to be an artist is going to be taking risks with expressing themselves, and part of that is joining contests. Part of that is just drawing something. I mean, if you expose what's inside of you to the outside world, to eyeballs outside of you, they could reject it. You could lose the contest. You could not get chosen for XYZ opportunity. And I think, just leaning into accepting rejection and failure, and like building up a tolerance for that rejection and failure, I think is a really important thing that maybe doesn't get focused on in school in certain ways. I think school focuses a lot on winning and getting the A. And, maybe I shouldn't say, but I got an F one time. And I think it was one of the most valuable experiences to fail something that I cared about.
What did you get an F in, if you don't mind my asking? I know
post-structuralist theory at Berkeley.
Okay.
Thanks,
right.
Thanks, Sab Mahmood.
Yeah. Listen, the value of getting used to failure, of being able to kind of handle it emotionally, being able to channel it and lessons learned productively. I'll share, because you were vulnerable with that. I'll share. When I was in college, and I was going to a ridiculous. It was the class was referred to as Rocks for Jocks. It was like one of the early like low number science classes, because I had to get a science credit. And I remember walking across the quad at Dartmouth, and I was like having a panic attack going to a test, because I had to memorize a bunch of stuff, and I just didn't feel like I was ready for it. I was having a panic attack about this stupid thing that mattered not at all, but it really felt like it to me. And I caught myself in that moment, and I was like, what is happening? First of all, it took me a little minute to realize what was happening. It's like, am I having a heart attack? Am I breathing? Like, why can't I do this? And then recognizing how much pressure I had been putting on myself, and how much like I had this sort of self identity built around always succeeding and always getting A's and always being that role, and how much that was hurting me. And it took me many more years to actually fully unpack all of that. But that recognition, and slowly getting used to failure, realizing that you as a human being are not impacted by any success or failure of the projects that you do. This is like, if there's any lesson that people listening to this take from this podcast, like, please take this one and then re-listen to it, because it took me many, many years to learn. And it's probably the biggest tool to unlock like your creative potential, is just, being able to divorce ego from outcome. And so I appreciate you sharing that story and helping to drive that home. And I'm glad we took this little detour, because I really do think it's just absolutely critical, especially in your role as an indie developer, and mine as well.
Yeah.
So let's jump to another fun topic. This one, in general, we may get to the contentious parts, but I want to talk about AI. And I want to start by not talking about the contentious parts at all, right? Because I think a lot of people are concerned about generative AI in the most recent wave over the last couple of years. But I specifically want to talk about the AI that you built for Shards of Infinity. You built the Shards of Infinity app. You've also done it for a bunch of other games. I got completely addicted to Race for the Galaxy, your Race for the Galaxy execution. Your AI, I said this to you before we started recording, and it is absolute truth. I can verify it with my play. I play the Shards of Infinity app more than I play any other app on my device. Full stop, not close. And that is in large part because your execution of it is so good and the AI is so good that it gives me a challenge, right? Like I win more than I lose, but not by very much. And so it creates a really fun, really cool experience. And I have, the Ascension app is not like that. I beat the Ascension app every time I care to do so. The other apps I've played, most games are not, they don't have that balance in a way that you guys have landed it. What, one, first of all, just kudos. And anybody out there that wants to like have a real, you can play. I recommend you start on easy mode if you don't know how to play Shards or you're getting new, because it's not easy at all on the hard mode. Why were you guys so successful at this? I think you've given talks on this. I've looked at some in the past. And then, maybe we can jump to what the world looks like now as the machines are smarter than we are now, or to whatever degree that is. So take that wherever you want to go.
Oh yeah. Okay. So big credit to Keldon Jones, our AI engineer, who has done something new in the world. There's a reason that our board game app AIs play different from everybody else's. And I think we are the first company to have neural network driven AI opponents in production, like in mobile apps, not in an academic situation or a, academic contest, but like, in a real game on min spec phones, which takes, not only some really ingenious engineering decisions that Keldon has come up with, but, also a lot of optimizations that him and Jeff Gates, our programmer and my co-founder, have really hammered on. I talked about hammering on QA and just playing the game a zillion times. Sometimes these optimizations just to get the AI to be performant on min spec machines, so that you don't have to be on the most fancy, expensive device to be able to play these amazing games that we really just want to have everybody play. So the thing that's kind of special about this AI technology is normally, a board game app is going to have an AI that's using a series of logic gates to say, okay, it's a script. In this situation, make A or B choice. Okay, next thing, make A or B choice given, this next situation. And that scripted process has a lot of limitations to it. But the neural network style of AI opponent is basically, I will say the word learning, but that's a maybe misleading term. But basically, the AI is developing a sense for what choices lead to a win. And over time, it develops a more fine and finer mathematical sense of the choice within a simulated sort of tree of choices it could make to choose the more optimal decisions that are going to lead to the win for the AI.
Yeah. And so it, in many ways, this kind of like, neural net and reinforcement learning of, what gets me to victory and what subset of choices are likely to do that is the way that a lot of the modern AIs have been trained. Obviously a lot more data, a lot more processing power to get us there, but it's this really interesting revolution, which particularly interesting to see that you were well ahead of the curve on this and you were using your powers for good. So thank you for that. How do you see the world developing now? And I don't know if you have thoughts on this. I know it could be contentious, but that both AI in terms of, look, most studios I know, their programmers are using this. A lot of different people are I certainly use it in a lot of ideation and I know it's not as good as a game designer as I am, but man, it's really useful as a brainstorming partner. Man, it's useful for other tools, and it feels like there's a lot that's changing. Have you experienced that? Have you played with that at all? Do you have predictions in that space?
Well, we don't use generative AI at Temple Gates. We, you know, I feel like there's a lot of gray area right now with copyright law, but we want to be on the right side of that. And basically, our company philosophy is to always prioritize trust, and we're given this like gigantic windfall of trust when we have a player even come to one of our games because they probably fell in love with it at their kitchen table with their best friend or their family with their favorite snack. And like they come to us with this degree of trust that we didn't really earn. So my view is all we have to do is not drop the ball. I think right now with generative AI, there is a lot of trickiness around this like covenant between the artist community, the creator community, and their copyright to what they have published into the world, with an expectation on how they will be able to control that material. And I think right now that trust is in a really shaky place. So we are not using generative AI. But I know it's a weird thing to say because we were like the first people to be using neural network AI in our board game apps. So I think, it's a complicated thing.
I don't think this is an easy question. And I bring it up, listen, I've had AI experts on the podcast. I have talked about this. We have, and I don't think it's easy. And I don't want anyone to pretend like there is an easy answer or have to be put on the spot. But I do think it's something we have to talk about because I don't think, to an extent, the genie's out of the bottle. And there are degrees of which nobody has contentions around using this stuff, right? If I can use it and have it, serve as a valuable therapist or doctor or legal advisor that could save me, either lots of money and time, or even potentially give me access to something I would not have access to if I'm in a third world country and don't have access to a great doctor, and it could serve that role. I think very few people would object to that there, even though it's maybe taking jobs away from hypothetical doctors or, using material that was taught that way. So I think there's some areas where it's getting more contentious. Also, most of the programmers I talk to are actually super excited to have their most of their jobs automated, which is kind of interesting. Some are not. Definitely some, but I find it's a very domain specific set of challenges. But I specifically for leaving that aside, like just staying in the range of like having a better AI opponent in my board game apps is a good thing, right? Like I want that very desperately, and so you're the only ones that have executed it well from my perspective. And I think more of that, more intelligence used in the right way seems like net positive for the space. So I don't know if you guys feel like your stuff you're able to use this any better, or are you making like, because for example, I'm not sure that the shards AI getting smarter helps the game at all. Like I don't know if I want it to be better than me all the time.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I think you're right. We get the patch notes. Sometimes we'll say improved AI, and like I remember seeing somebody's comment on Steam. It was like, what do they mean improved AI? We don't need improved AI.
yeah. There are limits. There are limits for sure.
Yeah.
But well, yeah, and so this just I'll linger on this a little bit longer just because I think it's an interesting design question, right? Like, design and development wise, like one of my goals when I'm making games is I want people to feel like they're winning all the time, but there's also these like opportunities for growth constantly, right? So you want that steady curve of learning, you want that steady curve of discovery, and so this like to me the Shards app is in this golden zone where I win more than I lose, but I lose often enough that it's still a real challenge. And I think you'd want an AI that would adapt appropriately to the player over that timeline where there's constantly like, yep, you're still winning, but you're still like, how do you think, like in your dream sense, like how would you think this is optimized?
I mean, I don't know. It makes me think of that one Star Trek episode where everybody got addicted to that one game.
Oh yeah.
I would be a little nervous. I get a little bit nervous with some of the hyper optimizations that are, like so honed in on like dopamine circuitry and pleasure circuitry. Like I definitely think there is a danger zone where you could, you could maybe go too far in delivering people such a perfectly balanced, thing. I don't know. I think like, I don't know, what's happening is like what I feel like innocent little games. We're just trying to give people some fun in their life. With the tools available now and the data available now, I feel like there is a lot more ethical like questions. Not to keep like bringing it back to this, but like the questions, the design around like I feel like there's more ethical design like necessary in an app where you could maybe super optimize that. And I think, do we want to just print money? No. Like, if we wanted to print money, we wouldn't be in games. We want to do something positive for the world. So I don't know. It's tricky.
Yeah. No, and I mean it's definitely what why we do what we do. We want to build communities and connect people and provide joy, and like, there's an interesting fine line between when is it am I using my powers for good, or am I using my powers for evil, right? Like, I'm building in addictive play loops and building in things that like help people stay engaged and keep you at that like nice challenge zone where it's like you're right at the edge of your ability. That gets you into flow states. That gets you into these, idealized parts of human experience. Like, these are not negative things, but if I'm using them to just like take money out of your wallet or keep you addicted so you're not like taking care of your kid or whatever, obviously there's a problem there, right? And so this makes you think of like the Infinite Jests by David Foster Wallace, where this, they make, in that case, it's like a movie that's like so good that once you see it, all you want to do is watch this movie, and it's a real problem. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a my general metric is like, would I want to be like the player of this game? Do I come away from this like as a player that I would not, and maybe he's not the best example to bring up when we're talking about ethics and controversy, but Elon Musk had this thing about talking about unregretted minutes, right? Like how many, we're not trying to optimize for engagement. We're trying to optimize for unregretted time, like where you're like, I actually enjoyed that. I'm happy I did that. And I come away on the other side, like feeling better about myself. I think is a decent metric, and it's fuzzy all around. Right. So, but I do think as the tools get more powerful, across the board, not just with games, we have a bigger responsibility and obligation to check with ourselves and say, hey, is this something where, I would feel good about this on the other side, where people are coming out of this saying my life is better because of it. Right.
Yeah.
So let's, while we're on controversial and topics of ethics, you've got and you clearly care a lot about this stuff. You've chosen a business model that is very much, I think, very customer friendly and very challenging to thrive as a business. You don't have any subscriptions, you don't have any micropayments, or other than some expansion purchasing, right? You don't have in-app gems or free-to-play games at all. You just have buy the thing, have it forever. And I know this from, even just the way we do with Shards and with the Ascension app, where, we have people who play, like hundreds and hundreds of hours every month, and they still like maxed out paying us $20, and that's it. They'll never pay us another dollar until we come up with a new expansion, and then it's, $2 more or whatever. Like, that's it. And so we don't optimize for their spend, but it makes it, if that game were a free to play game experience, I probably wouldn't have to do anything else other than work on that. Same has got to be true for some of the stuff that you've done. Let's talk about that tension and trade off. And again, a lot of developers out there, don't understand how hard it is to make those choices. And maybe you can speak to why you chose the way you did and how you think about it going forward.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, it is an uphill battle not putting gems in our games. At this point, it's, I think that the trick with gems is they really obfuscate to the player how much they're spending. And I think there's a risk there where someone could be taken advantage of, or, anyway, I think there's just a lot of ways to manipulate your users when you obfuscate how much money they're spending. And so one way to avoid that is being very transparent about the cost of things, which is what Temple Gates does. We are very explicit about like, this is, if you're using dollars in this region, we say how many dollars you're spending on this expansion, and you buy the expansion, and now you have that expansion. The trick is we are making cross-platform games. And the reason that we're making cross-platform games is because our role, in our relationship with the publisher and the designer and our player base is we want to help distribute the game to as many players as possible, to have lots of offerings, including a big, beefy multiplayer pool, so that it doesn't take you too long to find a suitable opponent who's going to be a real challenge for you or be just the right challenge that you're looking for. So that means we want players across all kinds of platforms. But the problem is all these platforms are in competition with each other, and they have an oversimplification is they have zero incentive to harmonize the feature sets that they support under the hood, the APIs, SDKs that we're like plugging into to deliver our products. They have zero incentive to harmonize those across the different platforms because they're all competitors. So the way that Steam operates is pretty different from the way that Apple operates, is pretty different from the way that Google Android operates. But we are delivering a product where our goal is to create the illusion that this is basically the same product across these three different platforms. And that is like increasingly challenging when there's updates to the platforms that are coming in hot and constant. And we're constantly like, oh my gosh, this doesn't support this notification protocol anymore. Or, the way that bundles work on Steam, bundles on Steam support this great feature, which I wish they all did, which is called complete the set. So if you're buying on Steam, and let's just say you're playing one of our games that offers a bundle because there's lots of expansions. If you buy on Steam, if you've already bought like maybe one expansion and then you realize I want the bundle, Steam will let you complete the set. So you get prorated, and the amount that you pay as a customer, you don't have to double buy that first expansion. But there's no other platform that offers that. And so if we were to just manage that ourselves and have gems, we could sort of like make it the same across all platforms. This is a long-winded way to say it is really difficult to not put gems in. But, it's part of our philosophy that we want to keep things really above board. But for anyone who is putting gems, and for anyone who's doing this, like, I kind of get it. Every so often we have the conversation of like, oh, we just got to do it. There's no way we're going to figure out how to continue our model, like even just from a technical point of view, let alone money. It's just how it's hard.
And so this idea of like gems and in-app purchases and this freemium game experience, it's got this like negative like valence around it, and there's this unethical mind. But I'm glad that I'm glad to surface you wrestling with this, kind of in public, right? Because it should be obvious to anyone listening, and I've known this for a long time. You are an incredibly ethical person. You care a lot about the work you do. You care a lot about the people in the community, and so they can see like actually it's really, really hard, and there's a lot of pulls for a developer that not only as from an economic viability standpoint, but from a product viability standpoint, from an actually being able to give customers what they want standpoint, like there's a lot of upsides to this stuff. So I think it's a, just seeing that the challenges of the trade-offs, and how as a designer, as a, publisher, as a kind of, person who's trying to link all the technical bits and pieces together, how you think about this, I think is super valuable, regardless of what the answer is, at the end of the day. And one of my goals is, we're going to make a lot of choices, and I like to experiment with a lot of different mediums and platforms, right? Ascension started as just a paid download app. Eventually it became a free to download app once we had enough expansions to make that a justifiable model. Obviously we had SoulForge Fusion as a more of a, a free to play with in-app purchases and currencies and all the things that you're afraid of, and even going further to make it a, some cryptocurrencies played with that, trying all different types of models, and including digital printed physical goods that are one of a kind and different. Many people complained about the TCG model with randomized packs and rarity as a abusive model, which to some degrees it absolutely is, but to other degrees it allows for player experiences and communities and support that wouldn't exist otherwise. So there's one of the things I like to do, and maybe this, this ties back into what we've talked about from the beginning, the value of being a generalist and not a specialist, is like understanding the implications of the business side, the production side, the interface design side, and the customer side and the game side all together that's how these decisions get made. They have ramifications across the board. And unless you're a generalist to some degree, and you listen to a podcast like this, or you get to hear from generalists, you don't get to know how to make those decisions well. If you just take a myopic view of one piece of the puzzle, you won't make the best decision. So I think it's really interesting, and you've wrestled with this for a long time. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, we've done plenty of fun contentious topics. Let's get to stuff that's less contentious here. Let's get to more about kind of the bread and butter of what the work that you do, right? Because we know, it's a lot of different aspects. I think the most interesting thing for me to start and dive in on, but I'm happy to jump in other areas, is kind of like UI UX when it comes to building these games well, right? It is so important, especially with, you've chosen to build board games in a digital form. So the rules of the game already exist to some degree, right? So there's maybe some small tweaks that happen when you move into the digital form. But like when you think about what makes a great UI UX, or the principles that you've learned, or just interesting trade-offs or changes that you've made to games, what comes to mind? Because I think this is an area that's people don't put enough thought into, and I think the same is true for physical games. Physical games also have UI UX is critical. But let's talk about your expertise area and what you've learned, and maybe a couple principles people could take away here.
Yeah. So from my point of view, board game apps are almost entirely UI. Sometimes people like UI has like a weird rap in the industry, in the video game industry, of like just doing UI. And it's like, well, don't do board game apps. That's all you do. And I think that's, basically because a board game is in itself an interface to a system. So the board game app, of course, is also going to be like a user interface to a system. It's fairly abstract relative to a lot of other kinds of video games. A lot of times there's tokens and units and, little pieces and cards, these very modular components that basically do a dance of like a spatial dance of like, okay, this piece is in this zone and it has this property. Maybe this zone is the market, and now it moves from the market to my deck or my hand. And this zone has a property where I can play it from this place, or it gets shuffled here. So there's just this like sort of dance of components that's happening in front of you. And, I am the UI designer at Temple Gates. And so it's my job to sort of make sure that dance is executed clear to the player, legible on phones, which are very small sometimes and difficult to read a whole board game, and making a lot of the difficult decisions on what information is going to get visually communicated or auditorily communicated in such a way that we maximize all the information the player would want to have available to them while making a strategic decision, and minimize any other noise, because board games are so complicated. So that's basically the job.
Maximize all the information people want to have when making a decision and minimize the noise, I think is a great phrase for this, right? Because like, let me know how this resonates with you. Right? To me, like, I think there's like a good user interface, generally speaking, wants like to do like three primary things, right? It wants to, to make it so that it's clear to me what is available for me to do. That the interface highlights the things I'm most likely to do and hides the things that are less likely to be useful. So it doesn't overwhelm me with information, and it makes me want to interact with it. Like it's pleasant, right? Yes. And so does that resonate with you in terms of kind of like how you think about your goals, or is there something I missed in that?
Yeah, and that kind of like dovetails into something where I think sometimes when people hear digital board game designer, they're like, well, what's the design? Like the board game has already got a designer. The game has a lot of design, but there are things that, like, for example, our board game apps often have like a primary OK button. And that doesn't really exist when you're playing the physical version of Ascension or the physical version of Shards of Infinity. There isn't an OK button. And it's something that the board game app has And that OK button often has thousands of functionalities sort of like plugged into it, that it kind of calls up the one that's relevant to this moment, and it simplifies it. It's just OK, but really OK might be in Shards of Infinity, use your focus ability in this moment because it's the end of your turn. So we as designers are saying, what does the player probably want to be doing? Let's make it a big shiny button. It's the most glowy thing on the screen. This is going to advance the game. And it's probably what they want without taking away the fun of the strategic decision from them. I think there's a little bit of a balance of like, well, if there's a real decision to be made, you want them to make it. But if it's sort of a throwaway decision, we can, for the sake of speeding the game along, make some of those things and present them almost as like one piece when it's really many, many.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack here because we'll get specific with Shards of Infinity because obviously it's the one I know the most and we worked together on a lot of this stuff. So it's that button, that's the primary OK button. It shifts dynamically throughout the turn from the play the cards in my hand. This is one of the most things I do, to exhaust and use the champions that I have in play, which would be the next thing that I would want to do, to use my focus power, to go attack my opponent with a bunch of stuff with whatever damage I have, which is at the end of the turn. And in addition, if I go and I hit that button too many times, but there's other things I could have done that I might not have noticed, then it will pop up a, hey, are you sure? Equivalent, right? And this is something I learned from doing Ascension the first time, where which things I choose to do and are you sure about is important too, because there's plenty of possible things you could do, but the opponent's champions are hidden in the screen, right? That you have to click on an icon to see what champions they have, and killing your opponent's champions is a pretty important decision that people are likely to miss. And so if I go to end my turn to deal my damage to the opponent, it's like, hey, your opponent has champions. Are you sure you want to end your turn, or would you like to take a look at those champions? And if I say no, I don't want to end my turn, it automatically pops open the tray to show you the champions, right? And so those are really impactful decisions to the flow and the experience of the game that are not they're not obvious or trivial at all. It's just some specific things that I think really do matter.
Yeah. We wanted to make it so that if you're a new player and you haven't played Shards of Infinity before and you didn't want to play the tutorial and you didn't want to read the rules and your friend didn't teach you, you could still sort of muddle through by hitting, you might not win and you might not have a great strategy, but you could kind of get to know the game through maybe over relying on the OK button, and then give yourself, as you're ready, an opportunity to explore some of the strategic choices you could be making instead of just spamming that OK button. And I think I would love more of our games to be as I think in Shards of Infinity, it was really successful, probably the most successful in this kind of design. And I would love more of our games to have that.
Well, you can't always work with me on these things, so it's never going to be. No, I find this stuff fascinating. It's so critical. And I mean, again, the same is true when I'm making a physical game and I'm designing the UI UX for it. Obviously I don't have the same set of tools available, but I have others where I make the icons that I need to draw your eye to really important and bigger in certain areas. I put all the information that's relevant when I'm trying to interact with a card in the center row in a certain place, and all the information that's relevant when I'm trying to interact with a card that I'm playing in a different place. And I try to make the things where I can draw your eye and help you get to certain areas, or I'll choose, and these were some interesting choices I've made different experiments on, when I'll choose a game that will, in Ascension, all the cards are kind of forwards and backwards looking. If I play a Unite card later in the turn, it can still trigger earlier in the turn. But in Shards of Infinity, it doesn't work that way. You have to do it when you play it, which can lead to different implications in terms of how I structure my turn order. And so there's that's sort of a game design and UI combination of how much this stuff matters and how I need to clearly get that information across to you in that moment. And I find it just there's so many little pieces that I think when I make a game, I'll even talk about this one because I'm working on a new game called Grassfed, which we have up on, we're collecting followers now on GameFound. We haven't launched it yet, but it's a regenerative farming themed deck building game. And we had a prototype of it that came out. We did a playtest in a physical prototype, and it was the text on the cards was just too long. It wasn't like easy to access. And we scrapped the whole thing and made almost all the text into icon language, like easy to read, like feels more beautiful, feels more like what I would expect from an open regenerative farming experience. I don't want a block of text, which I might be fine with in a, fifth expansion to a core game like Ascension, and there's a lot of text on a card, or Magic's 30th expansion has more text than ever before, or whatever it is, right? But it's not what I want when I want a game to feel like this open, beautiful farming experience, actually having like pretty icons and less text, which takes a little bit more from the user to understand what the icons are. But once you do, the experience is way more joyful. Is there something, we talk about that kind of either it feeling like the theme or that creating that experience of joy? Are there choices that come to mind for you that you've made in games, or that you think about when you think about building a UI, for games that you've worked on, or any of the projects that come to mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like one sort of hill that I will die on is I would like every icon in any of the board game apps that we work on to have like a top tip. So anytime you see an icon, and whether that's a currency icon of like how much this card costs, or a victory point icon, or even just like an icon that indicates which expansion the game is from. I am trying to put, and it's so much work, but I feel like, again, I think like what it gets you to is like fostering that trust, and that like trust with your player, that like they can, they can bite off a little bit more symbols and icons than they might be otherwise comfortable with, knowing that they can get that helper dynamically. And that's something we can offer digitally, where we can just pop that up depending on if the player has like moused over or clicked on the icon. But we're really in the role of like extending the designer like your vision, and the graphic artists that you're working with and the illustrators that you're working with. So like, we're not necessarily making those same choices about like how much text versus iconography is going on a card. We're mostly just running with the choices that you've made.
Well, yeah, but let me push back on that a little bit, because I think there are other things, right? Like for example, whatever, even just like Shards of Infinity, the interface that you guys designed feels very sci-fi and tech. When I use my power to attack you, like a laser comes across the screen, right? So there are choices like, yes, we set a kind of more sci-fi feel for the game, but then you had to make a lot of independent choices that make that feel appropriate, right? Whereas in the Ascension world, when you built the VR for Ascension, like you chose a more lush fantasy environment. There's plenty of environments in Ascension you could have chosen. Mechana is a more of a steampunky type of world, or the Void is a dark and different. Maybe you just chose it because that's your favorite. But I think that, it does. There are a lot of these aesthetic choices that you have to make when you're building a game that really do impact the feel of the game and impacts how a player wants to interact with it. Not just in terms of like utility of information, but also the bringing that world to life, even for a board game. Because in a digital board game, you've got more tools than a physical game does.
It's true. And I did study psychology, and I did study color theory. And so like it isn't a random choice that we chose the lush green background. It's a choice that's slightly informed by my bachelor's of psychology, and, probably being exposed to some kind of study where, there's a positive experience in certain color environments.
Is there any little concrete tips from that you could give? Like, 'cause I think that's really interesting. Like, how does color impact psychology in a way that maybe people should maybe wouldn't know, or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the preference for color is not absolutely symmetrical. There are preferences for certain colors, which there are theories that might be evolved to have us prefer a verdant and fruitful environment, or a safe environment. And so, you can, and something that Temple Gates does is we read white papers, we read research, and we do, we're not scientists, we're game developers, but we certainly are interested, like in what psychologists and what scientists are coming up with, and it's interesting to us to try to like apply some of what we read as lay people. And so you can do that too. There's all kinds of research papers out there. I'm part of a book club where we read a research paper and discuss it over breakfast. You can do that too, and then experiment.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me push you for some specifics because I know my audience likes that and I do too. Is there, either a particular psychological insight or paper recently that impacted you and some design decision that impacted, or is there one that you would recommend to our audience that was there? And I'll give you some time to think about it because, to me, I'm also fascinated about this stuff, and I've had, I've had academics on this podcast as well as designers and creatives because I think the cross pollination there is really interesting. And I've worked with the Wharton School of Business on, building better systems for creativity and team building for companies, and we've run workshops for Fortune 500 companies where I've applied game design principles to that. So I studied a lot of like, okay, what makes teams work well together? What in fact does make people more creative or less creative, and how do teams work that it foster creativity? And spoiler alert, most teams actually make themselves less creative by working together. And so I found that stuff super fascinating and then applied it into my business. And I'm continuing to work on ways I can take how we use game design theory to make games that are fun, engaging, have clear goals, give you the right kind of mindset, and how we can use that to make our lives and businesses better. So I'm 100% on board with this. And I think we should always be learning. But in terms of, I don't default to studying the psychological impacts of UI and these other areas. So maybe just where would you point me in the right direction, or some insight that you've taken to heart?
There's a book called Photons to Phenomenology by Stephen Palmer that is just, it was a textbook for a neuroscience class, but I don't know, it has all kinds of interesting ways to help understand, like, when you are seeing something with your eyes and what the light is doing and the psychological impacts of that. So that would definitely be top of my list to check out.
All right, a little holiday reading for me. I love that, and I appreciate it. Listen, I think that one of the what triggered me. I should have thought to have you on the podcast a long time ago, because we've known each other for a long time, and I've had respect for the work you do for a long time. But you did this post on Facebook that was about trying to describe your job, right? And all of the things that you do, right? Okay, I've got to design features. I've got to design the UI. I've got to do the editing and XML editing for things and get the art done and code and do marketing and PR and show up to events like the one you showed up to meet me, and do help with customer support and with the community, and be the person that manages the team and fundraises. Like, there's so many roles that's very hard to get across. So I thought maybe if we had an hour together, we could at least unpack some of that. And we got to, I don't know, 20% of it, maybe. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, sure.
So it's just, again, I love to highlight this sort of stuff because it's so, one, I don't think people see how much goes on behind the scenes and how important all of these roles are. Two, I just like to highlight amazing people, and you are that. And so it's been great. I'm really glad that you took the time to work on this and to work on games with me, because I love everything that we've built together, and I really hope we get opportunities to build more cool stuff.
Oh yeah, sign me up.
So for anyone that wants to see the cool things that are out there, obviously I'm going to personally recommend, the Ascension VR app and the Shards of Infinity app. I will also say I've played pretty close. The amount of Race for the Galaxy is probably got to be up there, at least in my top 10 things. And other games of Templegate, where should they go? How do they find more cool stuff that you've made?
TempleGatesGames.com. We got all our games there. Or you could, that's probably it. TempleGatesGames.com.
Fantastic. Okay, Theresa, thank you so much for taking the time. It is lovely to get to chat with you, as always.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you want to support the podcast, please rate, comment, and share on your favorite podcast platforms, such as iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever device you're listening on. Listener reviews and shares make a huge difference and help us grow this community, and will allow me to bring more amazing guests and insights to you. I've taken the insights from these interviews, along with my 20 years of experience in the game industry, and compressed it all into a book with the same title as this podcast, Think Like a Game Designer. In it, I give step-by-step instructions on how to apply the lessons from these great designers and bring your own games to life. If you think you might be interested, you can check out the book at thinklikeagamedesigner.com or wherever fine books are sold.